climate change as an issue has the potential to absolutely reorient the whole way that humanity must view how it is. And the first thing to appreciate is obviously that despite all of these pledges that are happening, all of these conferences and agreements and treaties about climate change, particularly with the Kyoto Protocol, despite the pledges to reduce CO2 emissions, obviously they're still being raised. The line on the graph is still going up. So with the Kyoto Protocol, the agreement was globally, on average, to decrease emissions by 5%, on average, 5.2%. And since 1997, the emissions have actually increased by 11%. So if we look towards the future at the projections in terms of fossil fuel use and the amount of transport and emissions that are going to increase, there's absolutely no way, if we carry on the path we're going, that there's any chance of reducing emissions. And now the United Nations have said in their final reports that we absolutely have to turn this whole engine around by 2015, if not 2012. And there's no evidence to say that this graph is in any way going to start to go down. So the other thing that we can accept on the most fundamental level is that obviously climate change isn't a future issue, it's already happening. So last year it experienced the most extreme weather events on record. 2005 was the hottest year in the last millennium. And you know, the Arctic ice cap collapsed last year. There's so many facts about how it's happening and the changes that are happening, even in this country. Floods have quadrupled in just a few years. And you could talk forever about the facts of what's happening. So it's not about an issue that's happening in the future, but it's something that's happening right now, and it's destined to get unbelievably huge unless huge fundamental changes take place within the issue of climate change. So for me, climate change affects the poorest most. And this is quite rightly the issue that most NGOs and campaigners focus on. The fact that by far, people in the developing countries who have contributed the least to climate change are already suffering in a massive way. Between 2000 and 2004, out of all the climate disasters that took place, 98% were happening in developing countries. And according to the studies, if we live in the OECD countries, in the rich countries like us, the chance of being affected by a climate disaster is about 1 in 1,500. So one person in 1,500 people could get affected. But in a developing country, the chance is 1 in 90. So the scale of how climate change is affecting the poor is monumental. So the second point is that popular commercial fixes don't address these underlying causes. So as a result of governments not addressing the basic causes of global warming, the result is that they're obviously asking the wrong questions. So rather than asking how we can respect the limits of the biosphere to sustainably manage a world economy, instead they're asking, well, how much can we increase efficiency to maintain growth in markets? And what economic globalization bases its beliefs upon, itself upon, is the idea that the best way of defining progress is through economic growth and through profit or maximum consumption. And yet trade, particularly trade like freight transport, which accounts for most of CO2 emissions, is seen as the best way of managing the economy. So we have this idea of endlessly opening markets, free trade, through competition on an international scale. And as a result, it's a complete contradiction to the need to limit CO2 emissions. So basically we have this series of conflicts in how we are, on one level, we're prioritizing international competition, unrestrained movement of goods and services, versus the need to cooperatively manage the global economy to reduce CO2 emissions, or the priority of endless creation of more wealth, more GDP, versus the need to create a sustainable world economy built within social and environmental limits. So even though the very, very poorest are supposedly decreasing, the amount of relative poverty is actually getting wider. So if we could say in this fundamental way that the economic system is raising the majority of people out of poverty is working for a majority, then there will be some justification for continuing on the present course. But we can actually question if this is true in any way whatsoever. Apparently there's about 854 million people who live day to day in a state of chronic hunger. So why share? What's the purpose of sharing? Well, to look at it again from this very basic point, we have to share because human life depends on sharing. Just as a family has to share what it has for a family to prosper, and a community must share its resources, its global goods and commons for a community to prosper, and a nation must share what it has for its nation to be healthy and educated, so must an international community share. But this is something so fundamental and elementary that the world community, for all of its long millennia life, has yet to accept. And so this question of, are the basic living standards, the basic quality of life, is it being raised for the majority of the people? This perhaps goes to the very heart of the paradigm of the economic model that we're living in. And for me, the simple answer is no. So if we could say,